Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm learning a lot, so that's good. Good, how are you? I have that packet for you. Welcome.
I figured out. There's a little. I didn't even well, I think she is too. I mean, I
All right, so.
How are you?
Good, nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming. All right, so thank you. We're good, thank you. Somebody brought a gavel. Nice work, Mr. Sox. So I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Children's Services Council of Leon County, our June 2nd publicly noticed meeting. First, I'll ask Ms. Jessica Goodman-Taylor to call the roll.
Good afternoon, council members. Please announce your presence when I call your name. Ms. Carmen Connor. Commissioner Carolyn D. Cummings.
Present.
Dr. Zandra Glenn. Superintendent of Schools Rocky Hanna.
Here.
Ms. Liza McFadden. Mr. Paul Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Mark O'Brien. DCF Northwest Regional Director Walter Sox.
Here.
The Honorable Jonathan Scherstrom.
Present.
Leon County School Board Member Alva Striplin.
All right, it does appear that
Attention.
we're still in the interim period where it doesn't, we are not on 3 strikes yet. It does appear that we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I did want to bring one change to your attention, just a typographical error. If you look on item 10, trim A, small Roman numeral 1, small numeral 3, it says June 23rd. That meeting is June 22, not June 23. So the agenda is a approval of the minutes, then public comment, then discussion of the interim administrator, update on the interlocal agreement, election of the treasurer, committees, trim, schedule of future meetings, agenda for the next meeting, member comment and adjournment. So it's a little bit of a lengthy agenda. Any changes, corrections, discussions of the agenda?
I'll move approval of the agenda.
All right.
Second.
Any other discussion? All right. So any objection? All right. So we'll show the agenda unanimously approved. Approval of the meetings in the package of the minutes, I'm sorry, from the May 19th, our last meeting.
I'll move the approval of the May 19th minutes.
A second.
Second, so moved and seconded. Any discussion? Without any objection? Without objection, the minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Have we received any cards for public comment? Any public comment? Anybody who hasn't? Ms. Jessica Goodman-Taylor?
Yes, Your Honor, we have two speakers, Ms. Emily Fritz.
All right, Ms. Fritz. You are recognized for 3 minutes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. My name is Emily Fritz and my address is 1433 Vucray Drive. I'm here to talk about the needs assessment. The needs assessment is your roadmap. And if you want the best for our children, you should use the best roadmap you can get. The Planning Committee report is not a needs assessment. It barely scratches the surface. You need to roll up your sleeves and dig deeper. I'm recommending that you contract with a professional research firm to bring expertise to the process. This is not a criticism of the Planning Committee members. They were only given selective information, and the data provided was not what the most current data that was available at the time. Now some of it's outdated. Much of the information is anecdotal, and anecdotal information is unreliable. An example of anecdotal information happened at your last meeting. It was said that the ELC only provides childcare to 100 children. I made a public records request to the ELC and learned that it enrolled 4,583 children in school readiness last year. Neither the committee report nor the whole child report include an analysis of the existing children's programs. There are over 150 children's programs in Leon County. Do you know what all of them do? Do you know how many children they serve? Do you know which ones are most cost effective? Neither report answers these questions. All of these groups are going to come to you for money, but you can only fund a handful of them. How are you going to know which ones to choose? Page 9 of the committee report acknowledges that the scope of work was written by Political Action Committee. The consultant's contract has a memo, which is attachment C in the contract, and it's from the PAC. There's supposed to be a firewall between politics and governance. Using a Political Action Committee tool for policy decisions is bad public policy. Page 8 of the report says that the Martin County CSC brought the county to #1 in the state in breastfeeding. I went to the Department of Health's website and looked at 15 years of breastfeeding data. It was never #1 during that period. In the 3 years leading up to the committee report, it ranked number 16, number 18, and number 10. The whole child report has value, but it's just a snapshot. You need the full picture. And there's a significant error on page 14. Leon County ranks number 43 in the state in food insecurity, not number 4. I brought the documentation of everything I've said with me, and if any of you want to see where I got the information I just relayed to you, I'll be happy to show it to you. Please contract with a professional research firm that has no biases and political agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other public comment today?
Good afternoon. I am Daryl Jones. I live at 324 Chastain Lane, and I'm also a member of the Leon County School Board representing District 3, which includes all of our schools in Southern Leon County, and I'm also the vice chair. I just wanted to offer my comments as you begin your work here in the early stages to say how very delighted that I am that in our community that we made the choice to make this particular, I would be the one, right? To make this particular investment in our young people. And I am excited about your work moving forward. I am very, very pleased to see so many persons who I have a great deal of respect for, to include my own colleague, Ms. Alva Striplin, our superintendent, and well, the jewel of District 3, the principal who's now your vice chair, Ms. Carmen Connor, Pineview Elementary School. And the only thing I would like to advise, if I might, or offer for you to consider, as you can imagine, this influx of potential revenue for the purposes of serving our children does provide enticement for a number of stakeholders in our community. And I can imagine even for some, they would see this perhaps as another extension of already existing methods and means by which we fund children's service organizations, most specifically, much like CHP. But I would hope that y'all would do something different than what our community human services partnership program does, and that is to look to non-traditional sources for ingenuity and innovation, such that we can make certain that we have the impact and be able to show the moving of the needle towards student progress and achievement far different than what we ordinarily do. I'd like to also remind you, much like what has been described earlier, if we look to different voices, different paradigms, different pedagogy, if I might use an education term, to inform what we'll do moving forward, we can guarantee the greatest impact, particularly for the children that are in my district. Our district is comprised entirely of Title I schools. I am the only school board member whose entire district is Title I school. And as you can imagine, this work will have long-term impacts for my children, what will be their long-term success. And so what I'm hoping is that we would look to the enormous resource that is our academic institutions. You'll note that both major universities have colleges of education. Then there's also the Flagler College of Education, all of whom are employing teachers. And here with the research and the graduate research that is being done there, I can imagine that through their research, they are coming up with brand new and innovative ways by which we can reach the child whom this particular project was designed to assist. So I'm just asking, as you continue to move forward, create your bylaws, that we would look to, as we would say metaphorically, putting new wine into old skins, or such that we can make certain that we have the type of impact for my children and for their families that will make this a great legacy project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and for being here. And I suspect we might be calling on you later on. You know, there's going to be lots of assistance and help that we're going to need, and it's really heartening for you to be here and to address this and to throw down a challenge for us. Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you, sir.
Discussion of administrative interim administrators. So this is item 6 on the agenda. This says review contract and delivers. When we met the last time, at the end of the meeting, y'all charged me with doing some things, some of which I was comfortable with and some of which in the end I was not comfortable with. The thing that I'm completely comfortable with was trying to go out and find somebody for y'all to consider. The part that I am not at all comfortable with, and I'm not sure that you really wanted me to do this, was spending any money. I did not want to come and bring you sort of a completed, this is my idea of what we should do, and it's done, and y'all don't get anything, have any say in it. So what I wanted to do was tell you what I thought, introduce somebody to y'all that I thought would has the credentials and the experience and the background and the know-how and the want to be able to serve the council, and then have the council have a discussion about it and decide. So the person, we circulated and had made as a part of the package, I think, Mr. Granger's resume. And I wanted to sort of turn the meeting over to him. It's a little unorthodox to do a job interview here in the middle of the Children's Services Council meeting, but I kind of think that's what we should do, is have this be, since this is somebody that's going to, the person that we're going to be relying on to stand this organization up, establish the systems and processes and resources necessary for the organization to function, that it wasn't my decision, it's our decision. So with your permission, I'd ask that we have Mr. Granger address us at this time. Is that acceptable to everyone? Mr. Granger, the floor.
Thank you, Judge. And before I start talking about me, which I can talk about for hours, I want to thank you, Judge, for taking the mantle of leadership, for getting the CSC running and going, and to all of you council members for the wonderful work you're going to be doing over the next few months to set the foundation for what will be an organization that will have incredible, positive, long-lasting impacts on and changing the trajectory of lives of thousands and thousands of children in Leon County. Thank you for that. And regardless of whether you get me on board today or in the future or not at all, I wish you the best of luck in this. I've been working with CSCs as the president of the United Way of Florida for the last 25 years or so. And where CSCs exist, the data on the children in those areas is better in many, many ways. So congratulations. In terms of me, I know a few of you on the board. I know the names of most of the rest of you. And I graduated from FSU Law School many, many years ago. I worked with the Florida Legislature in the Commerce Committee as a staff member. I worked for the Florida Chamber of Commerce lobbying for about 3 years. I had my own law practice for a couple of years, doing some trial practice and a bit of other stuff. And then I got hired to be president of the United Way of Florida, which I stuck at for close to 30 years. And the reason I did that, because I view, properly run United Ways as mechanisms to bring about fundamental change in communities. In a lot of ways that this council will, in terms of bringing different constituencies together, focusing on the needs, focusing on how to spend the dollars most appropriately, most efficiently, and instead of with taxpayers, with donors, because our highest, as nonprofits, our highest thing that we have to strive for is making sure that we take on and do what the donor intends with the money that they provide. And the same with the council with regard to taxpayer dollars. We're on an incredibly short timeline here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that perhaps a little bit later with regard to the budgeting. But you heard from Alachua County exec Colin Murphy a week or two ago. And they started in December on the process that you saw for their first year. We're starting in June and we have to have a tentative budget to the county in about 3 weeks. Actually, we have to have it done by June 22nd, which is the second meeting from now. And hopefully we'll get it done by June 15th. So I'll be leaning on all of you a lot for this. Elizabeth is making copies of my resume bio. Basically, it's just a list of organizations that I've chaired.
Elizabeth is Elizabeth Garber.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. And I should say the following thing. Based on the charge that y'all gave me last time, Mr. Granger did a lot of work. He's been, volunteering since our last meeting. So he may have some assumptions that y'all may not be aware of, because he's been working hard on this for about the last, since our last meeting, since May 19th. So he's worked a ton with Jessica Goodman-Taylor, with Elizabeth Garber, and he's probably met with some of y'all too. But I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Granger. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say with that, some of you may have in mind other people to do this and whatnot. I'm happy to do that as a volunteer because this effort needs to get underway. And if y'all are going to get the money that you need with the quality backup to make sure of the accountability, the outcomes, et cetera, it's got to start sooner than later. Is kind of the long and the short of it. So I guess that's all I have to say, unless anyone has any questions or anything.
So let me say one other thing, which was that we had discussed a little bit about whether there was a county employee that could be provided by the county without charge to us. And the answer to that is no. As far as I am aware, there is not a county employee that's available to us. So this is Mr. Granger. Any discussions, comments, questions to Mr. Granger? Yes, Dr. Glenn.
I just have a quick question. I know we discussed at our last meeting that whoever sits in the interim position is not eligible for the permanent position. Are you aware of that? And are you comfortable with that? Are you accepting that as I'm going to get them started and then I will prepare for the next person?
When the judge first called me, number one, it knocked my socks off that he was interested in me, but I've been retired for 1.5 years. And I have to tell you guys, I've been doing this a lot of time with a lot of organizations, and you'll see it on the page that Elizabeth is going to hand out. I can't think of any other job that I would come out to do other than this out of retirement, because this is so fundamentally important for decades to come. So no, I have no interest in going beyond 6 months. I will stay if needed longer, particularly because of the executive search committee that I'm hoping to kick off next week. And I want to get that new CEO on board so I can go back to fishing.
I wanted to make sure you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. O'Brien. You got to push the
Right
button. It
below
should have a red, it should be glowing
Right there
red.
on the mic. It's no, on the mic.
Gray button.
Right in the middle there. There you go.
Just a comment about Mr. Granger. I've known Mr. Granger for quite some time, been involved in the United Way. Anybody who's been tagged to the not-for-profit community in Tallahassee knows him and his reputation. He's just an incredible individual. I have a high confidence in the work that he's done in the past and the work that we do here. Very experienced, but we also get the benefit of someone who knows and understands this community. And I think that for an interim leader, we could not have a better person standing in that role. He certainly knows how to run organizations.
I'd like to echo what Mark said. I've known this family a long time. The boys went to Leon High School when I was principal. Just an upstanding individual who's passionate about this community. If you pull the guy off of the flats at St. Mark's or wherever his fishing hole is to come do this pro bono, then it speaks to the person you are. And thank you so much for being here.
I don't have any comments. I was incredibly impressed by your resume, Mr. Granger, and kind of sent that message back to you, Judge. I think you did a great job, and I think we were wise to entrust you with this. I am kind of curious about the procedure of how we would bring Mr. Granger on. Does the CSC has, and I know that Commissioner Cummings, the county is about to meet and sort of approve something, but right now we don't have any money. And to the superintendent's comments, I heard you say pro bono, and I'm certainly, if you would like to do this pro bono, Mr. Granger, I thank you, but I am not really sure it's fair to ask somebody to do it pro bono. You don't strike me as a guy who's looking to create another nest egg for yourself in retirement, but at the same time, I think we should compensate you for your time. So I'm not sure procedurally how we spend money that we don't have, but I know we're about to have some money, and I know that the county has talked about offering that money up front that we could then pay them back after we began to see funds into our account. So procedurally, like I'm all for moving forward immediately. I think this needs to happen really quickly because we need guidance And it's unfair of us to ask you to do it, Judge. It's just, it is. So I want to see it happen as quickly as possible. I don't think, and I have sat through public hirings with the Office of Insurance Regulation and the Office of Financial Regulation Commissioner, and it is awkward. So I am again comfortable turning this back over to you, Judge, working with the county to find out, would he be an employee of the county? Would it be an OPS type position? What is a fair and reasonable compensation package for him? Again, yes, sir.
So I thought through this. Next item on the agenda is an update on the local agreement. I'll just give you the update, which is the county set to vote on June 8th. Interlocal agreement to include a $400,000 loan. I asked Mr. Granger, I myself, in the very first agenda, I included some data on the salaries that are paid to other executive directors around the state. I asked my staff, Elizabeth Garber, to look at sort of comparables on county staff. Here's what I think is fair to the council, fair to the person that we're asking to do this job, which is that we appropriate or we agree to pay $50,000 over the next 6 months for an executive level position. That's considering, I don't think this is going to be a full-time job. I think it's going to be about 3 months. So, I mean, that's my big picture view of it. Ms. Cummings, Commissioner Cummings.
Thank you, Judge Sestrom. I've also met with Attorney Granger and was very impressed about his interest in the Children's Services Council, as well as the contributions that he has made here in Leon County with nonprofits and other entities. So having said that, Your Honor, I move that we employ Mr. Granger as our interim executive director at a salary of $50,000 contingent upon execution of the memorandum of understanding agreement with Leon County.
And I'll second it and have a question for you, Commissioner, and that is, again, logistically, I understood Judge Shorstrom's comment of $50,000 for 6 months. Is that as an OPS employee? Is that as an employee of the county with benefits? And or is it sounds like he will be a contracted employee through the county for $50,000 for 6 months?
So that's
Commissioner, is that
Well,
consistent with
my
your
motion was basically as an independent contractor
Yes, ma'am.
for 6 months, and I guess I can clarify that. As an independent contractor for 6 months, contingent upon execution of the memorandum of agreement with Leon County.
Very good. So that my second holds. I just thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
any discussion? So there's a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Member McFadden, thanks so much. You come in at an interesting time.
Just vote yes.
I just have a quick question for him. Does that work for you? It does? Okay.
Silence is sustained, Mr. Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying, yeah, no, that's wonderful for me. 6 months, definitely, unless it needs to be extended. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the deliverables that will be in the contract, which I haven't seen yet, but because it's waiting on the 8th for the county to do their thing.
Can you just go ahead and show us the deliverables at this point?
You know, I don't have them with me at this point. I've got in my PowerPoint, though, I think I've got enough that aren't in my deliverables and some that are that kind of show the substance of what needs to be done.
That's what I had in my PowerPoint slide. There's a PowerPoint slide on deliverables.
It is deliverables mostly that are not in my agreement that need to be done too. So, but they're pretty compelling too, I think.
We're meeting within the week. I assume that we can schedule you to provide those at the next meeting?
Yes, absolutely.
Judge, I had a quick question. We talked a little bit about sort of the status of the employment relationship, whether it be contractual or an employee. I understand we're still working on the interlocal agreement with the county. If the Children's Services Council is going to have a bank account from which checks can be drafted from, and we can write contracts, my preference would be that they be a contractor with the CSC, not a contractor with the county. I do think as an independent board, we need to insulate ourselves from the county and not have the contractor have to follow contract management, contract monitoring, all of the audit requirements that the county has. There's a whole lot in the county government world that we don't have on our plate. And so I just offer that up as, I don't know if the interlocal agreement is going to allow us to do that, but if the design is for us to establish a bank account, establish a checking account, able to draw up a contract, able to sign a contract with the contractor, able to write checks to the contractor on whatever pace the contract allows for, I think that would be the preferable option.
No, I just wanted to say generally, Your Honor, I think the statute allows us all those latitudes. Absolutely.
So you consider that part of your motion? That it would be a contract?
I would agree to, that being part of the motion or a friendly amendment to the motion, absolutely.
So if I can throw just one, I mean, I agree with the motion for everything with the exception of the interim director. And I'm only thinking through, again, logistically, I don't care how we do it. It sounds like the board has decided Mr. Granger's the right guy. We've got the price set, but we're going to be asking Mr. Granger to be setting up the checking account and doing, it's very difficult to bring someone on as a contract employee before you have the establishment of an account so that I have zero problems with the concept. I'm just not sure that logistically it works. And if the county, again, when they vote on the 8th, understands that this is the one thing that we are asking of them to take on as a contract employee, that they would bring Mr. Granger on as a contract employee for the 6 months. If the contract is extended past those 6 months, the CSC would bring him on as a contract employee. I'm just not sure that you can hire somebody without an account open.
So when I talked with Mr. Granger about it, this is sort of why the concept that I have is 50 divided by 6. $6,000. And until we get money, he can't get.
Right.
We may, I think the county is going to come through on the $400,000 loan by the June 8th meeting. But as a contract employee, part of the contract can be he gets paid when we get money. So that was my thought about it. To be perfectly candid, my thought hasn't gone much farther than that.
Judge, I'm sorry, Commissioner. As a volunteer, I have already been in the process of finding legal assistance and finding a CPA firm, an accounting firm, et cetera. One of the first things that needs to happen is setting up a bank account, of course. And I anticipate doing that more within the next week or so, if that's y'all's pleasure. As an independent contractor, Mr. Sachs, what you just said is right. The special independent district will be its own entity. So the contract will necessarily have to be between the Children's Services Council and me, as opposed to Leon County. The interlocal agreement, as I understand it at this point, after having talked with the county attorney, is merely we're loaning you $400,000, you pay us back with interest by such and such a date. It doesn't have any provisions relating to my employment or the employment of any other CSC person.
So essentially, I think you made the point, as a volunteer, you've done this. So yeah, logistically, it's
Well,
with me,
the-
just,
Starting today, if you guys retain me, because it has been on a volunteer basis, as an independent contractor, it's not an hourly gig. It's kind of, okay, what did you do from this point to this point? And that would be in the contract that this is the point. So that from here on, I would be paid for the work that I do.
So basically, what we're looking at is your work has been as a volunteer up to this point. If we approve you moving forward, then we would basically establish a contract with you, paid through the funding we receive from the interlocal agreement. That contract would be backdated to this day, which is June the 2nd. Is that
The date
agreement?
that you confirm me. Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
All right, any other discussion, comments? Any other discussion, any other discussion?
I didn't realize we had money to spend, so this is much better than pro bono, right, Mr. Granger?
Well done, Judge.
the only other comment I would make is, Mr. Granger, you mentioned that you had talked to CPA firms and law firms. And again, if when this moves forward, I think that's great. But especially when it comes to members in this community who are willing to give of their time. And I hope that you talk to the board members about law firms and about CPA firms, as opposed to sort of jumping the gun on. But everything else, I'm very comfortable.
That's a great idea, because I've been kind of, roaming around in the dark. I will email each of you after this meeting to see if you have thoughts about any of these services that we're going to be contracting out.
And on that topic, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody about the open meetings requirement. You can communicate with Mr. Granger. We can't communicate with each other outside of the meeting. So there have to be individual communications that you have with each of the members.
And Judge, I shared with Mr. Granger that I'll get him the contact information for our interim administrator in Escambia County, Carolyn Applewood.
Excellent.
That way he'll have a peer that he can talk to.
Yes.
She's not getting paid, but other than that.
And I've
she's on
already
that
had a
same-
couple.
She's on that same journey.
Yes.
That you'll be
indeed.
on, is the building of a trust.
And I've already talked with Colin Murphy at Alachua too, who's been a wealth of information.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, Your Honor, did that motion carry?
We have not voted on
We
it
didn't
yet. I
have a
want to make
vote.
sure Member McFadden knew what we were voting on. So what we are voting on is whether to employ as an independent contractor of the CSC, Mr. Granger, for 6 months at a cost of $50,000. So that is the motion.
Contingent on the county's
Effective today?
approval.
What's that?
Effective today?
Effective today,
Right.
effective
And
immediately.
contingent on the
Contingent on the
county.
county's approval.
Contingent on the county's approval. That's right. Contingent on the county's approval
Contingent
Approval
on,
of funding.
of funding.
Letter of
funding.
credit.
All right. Any other discussion? Any objection? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Welcome aboard, Mr. Granger.
thank you,
I
Judge.
feel like I finally got the fish in the boat. I appreciate that.
Well, if I might say, I told you it would be the only thing I'd come out of retirement for. I've done a lot in my life, and this is one of the highest honors, if not the highest honor I've ever had, to serve you all and to help get this thing going. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
you,
Granger.
Ted.
Thank you. Excellent. It says introduce Ted Granger for comments. I think we've already done that. All right. Update on interlocal agreement. We've really already done that. County Commission will vote next Wednesday, June 8th, on an interlocal agreement, including a $400,000 loan to the CFC to fund our operations through November of 2021, after which time we'll begin receiving millage to fund our budget.
Judge, is there opportunity to get that loan interest-free from the county?
Not that I know of. Commissioner Cummings, your thoughts?
I'm not sure. We can certainly inquire. I think I saw the draft and it was what, 1.5% interest?
I just
believe
think
it's proposed, it is very low, but I'm not sure.
If we were to deposit it and earn interest on it, then we could remunerate that interest to the county. But as a sister agency, it seemed kind of fair that they would go interest-free on that.
Commissioner Cummings, we are now well beyond my knowledge.
I really don't know, Your Honor. I certainly would be willing to, to inquire. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that's the best we can do, Mr. Science. on the-
Well, and if revenues come in November, there's no problem paying it back early, right?
There is
I
no,
think there's provision with, where there is no prepayment penalty for paying it off early. Absolutely.
That would reduce the concern.
a prepayment penalty would annoy me. I will say.
That would annoy us, yes. That would annoy us.
Yes. I can't begin to imagine, but we will run that to ground. And Mr. Granger has been working with the county. We don't have a draft of the interlocal agreement yet. We're hoping to have, we'll certainly have a draft of it by our next meeting. All right, so Mr. Mitchell, the next item on the agenda really goes to your point, I think, which is election of a treasurer. Because the role of the treasurer is to do some of those logistical things like what you're talking about. Be able to sign checks, be able to establish accounts, be able to make certain that the funds that we receive are properly, transparently administered. So the role of the treasurer is an important role, and we need one. So I wonder if anyone is willing to serve as the treasurer, if anybody has anything in mind. Commissioner Cummings, do you have any interest in serving as the treasurer?
Well, Your Honor, thank you for that confidence, but since we have a banker as part of our council, I would like to move for Mr. Mark O'Brien to be our treasurer. I'm not a banker. You're not a banker?
Well,
He's married to one.
That's close
And
enough.
she's good.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm married to a banker.
I'm sorry, hospital. Well, I guess in that role.
He's a spender, though.
Lots of money that comes through his business.
I'm sorry. You're going to nominate Mr. Mitchell? Well, I can amend my motion then. Mr. Mitchell as the treasurer.
I would gladly do it.
Oh, awesome.
Mr. Mitchell has,
Yes, sir.
I'll third it.
we have a second, we have a nomination, we have a second. Do you need a second on a nomination? I don't know, but any discussion of Mr. Mitchell?
I just remind folks on page 19 of the yet to be approved bylaws, there is a bullet that says if the chair and vice chair absent, the treasurer presides at the meeting. So you'll be third in charge.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, there you go.
That's fine.
Well done.
I'm sure I can orchestrate traffic or something.
So let me just say the following thing. The council is packed with people who care very much about children, know lots about children's issues, have a lot of experience in different aspects of child welfare. Just as important as all of that is, accountability is important. Business acumen, business sense is important. People who dig into the details, people who dig into the information and ask hard questions. And in our first meetings, you have demonstrated every one of those capacities. And I can't tell you how happy I am that you're willing to do this, because we need you, and we need the bleeding heart do-gooders of the world, like myself, need a hard-nosed business people of the world if this council is going to fulfill its purpose. So I'm so glad that you're willing to serve. Anything else? Any other objection? Any discussion? So we will show Mr. Mitchell elected as treasurer without objection, unanimous. So one of your first jobs, treasurers works with Mr. Granger to secure a fiscal agent and CPA firm, handle our books and payroll. All right, so you are so charged with the responsibilities of the treasurer of the Children's Services Council of Leon County by the vote of the council. Bylaws Committee. So we circulated bylaws. There's one change that I made that I wanted to make sure I brought to your attention. And it's the interim and organizational meetings on page 16 of the package. And sort of what I defined as our interim and organizational period is my best guess at what would get us through most of the trim process. And this is the period when we're going to have more than one meeting a month. We've got 3 meetings scheduled in June. With any luck at all, we'll be able to cancel one of them. But that's the change from the only change from the bylaws. The bylaws should be as the bylaws committee adjusted them after our one and hopefully only bylaws committee. So any discussion of the bylaws?
So just to
Dr.
comment
Glenn.
on what you just said, I completely agree. And just to change the wording to make sure it's appropriate, the council should meet at a minimum twice monthly, just to accommodate for the fact that we do have 3 meetings scheduled in June.
Oh, yes. So we'll say at least, or at a minimum, you said?
I said at a minimum, but
At a minimum. So now the sentence reads, during the organizational period through and including August 19th, 2021, the council shall meet at a minimum of twice monthly on the schedule set out below. Fair enough. Thank you. All right. Any discussion of that proposed amendment to the bylaws? So is there a second on the motion to amend the bylaws that way? We need a second. I think we probably need a second.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion? Any objections? So we'll show that change is adopted, and now we're on the proposed bylaws. Any discussion of the proposed bylaws? Questions,
I have a
corrections?
area I'd like to discuss.
Yes, ma'am, whenever you're ready.
Under the conflict of interest, I went back and pulled the conflict of interest from the various children's services councils.
Yes, ma'am.
And under D, we have no member shall serve as a staff member of any agency when more than 10% of the agency's budget is provided and no portion of the member's salary may be paid. It's much looser than, let's say, Palm Beach that says no member of the council shall serve on the board of any agency financed wholly or in part by the council. No member shall serve as a staff member of any agency financed wholly or in part by the council, and no portion of the member's salary may be paid by the council funds. I guess I'd like to bring it up for conversation that the appearance of conflict is as challenging as actual conflict. And I would, for one, would like to lean toward the wording in the Palm Beach County conflict of interest rather than what we have here. But, I certainly am open to understanding why we would put something like that in here.
Could I ask you to read the language again that you're?
Sure. No member of the council shall serve on the board of any agency financed wholly or in part by the council. No member shall serve as a staff member of any agency financed wholly or in part by the council, and no portion of a member's salary may be paid by the council funds.
For the purpose of moving to this for discussion, I'll second that motion.
All right, very good. Any other discussion of the proposed change?
Liza, I think it's a good point. And one of the reasons, I don't know that Whole Child Leon will have any funding through this, but one of the reasons I decided to resign my position at Whole Child Leon before serving on this was when I could recuse myself when that vote came up, but in the back of my mind, if even just 1% of something that I'm supportive of if I know I have a bucket of $100 and I'm thinking to myself, well, I want to make sure that I've got $5 left for something that I can't help myself. And that is why, and there are some perfect people out there. There really are, and I think they can rise above it. But I think it makes it especially challenging. And I'm hoping that the Children's Services Council, that the voters 10 years from now look back and say, you know what? Those 10 people who got this thing kicked off, they did everything the right way, and perception mattered to them. And so I completely agree with the point you raised, Ms. McFadden, and I'd like to see it put into the bylaws.
Yep. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? So let me just be perfectly candid with how the language got written. Language got written because I took it out of the Alachua bylaws verbatim, and I probably didn't give it the consideration that I should have given. So,
And Judge,
Dr.
just
Glenn,
to be fair to you, I think we got rid of the Alachua and absorbed the Escambia.
so it's
So
Mr. Sox's
I think
fault.
we did look at this, and the Escambia one was a little tighter than Alachua,
Yes.
and Palm Beach appears to be a little tighter than Escambia.
All right, fair enough.
So I'm wondering if the no more than 10% was taken out, if it would accomplish the same thing, or it would say none, member of agency when none of the agency's budget, or any of the agency's budget.
Yeah, I think it isn't 10%, it's any.
Maybe the word any instead of
Yeah.
word no more than, or I don't know what the word, it might be easier just to change a word if it gets to the same point.
But we need board member too, I think.
When any amount of the agency's budget is provided by the Children's Services.
Say again.
Just take out the 10%. I mean, there are legalese, or you've got attorneys here that can word this better than I am, wordsmith it, but you could say something to the fact, no member shall serve as a staff member of any agency when any
budget?
of the agency's budget is provided by.
Or you could just say whose budget. So no member shall serve as a staff member of any agency whose budget is provided by the Children's Services Council of the Country. So get rid of when
When
more.
any funding, maybe not budget, when any funding is provided by.
Okay.
I think we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I think we are all.
Yeah.
It does leave out, however, the board issue.
Say again.
It takes care of the staffing issue, but not the board issue.
Yeah, we need to make sure it covers both.
So let me read a proposed sentence and you tell me if it works.
No member shall, no member, it would be us though, right?
Right.
That's us.
No member shall serve as a staff member or board member
Yeah.
Correct.
of any agency when any of the agency's budget is provided.
Right.
Is that the sense of the committee? Is that the sense of the council? All right, so there's a motion and a second. Not so fast, Mr. Hanna.
Well, no, because I'm not sure. I mean, I think I know what most of you do for a living, and I'm not sure exactly what boards you sit on or don't sit on. I know Ms. Strickland is not here today, and I know what she does outside of being a school board member, and this would directly impact her organization would not be then considered for funding, am I correct? By this group. That's what we're saying, right? I just want to be clear. So if you're on a board of any nonprofit in the community, this organization cannot fund it at all. Okay.
So would you prefer that we wait on the issue until she can?
I don't know that we need, I mean, that's not.
I think it
don't
leaves the
think-
door open if we don't do something like that. And I agree that we need to be as much as possible beyond reproach, at least, especially as we.
No, I
set this
agree.
Organization up.
I agree. I just want to make sure I was clear.
And it
on-
doesn't preclude that organization. I didn't even think about Strickland, but from receiving state funds, I mean, county funds, just not any.
No, I
that are
agree.
appropriated
Right,
by
which is why
the
in the event you step down from Whole Child Leon's board.
Yeah,
So if
that's,
any of the rest of you are on any boards that may be requesting funding from this group,
You may have to fall off those boards.
not simply recuse yourself from the vote.
yeah, and I did. I thought it's a great point you raised, Mr. Hanna. I thought really long and hard. I don't think I can close my eyes and just say, and I love Whole Child League. It was hard. But I sit on the Juvenile Justice Foundation board. I don't think that they should come here. And if they do, I'll resign my position there. The same, I mean, I really believe that 10 years from now, we should be able to look back and say, I don't have a client, I don't have a board, I don't have anything involved in this. And we're protecting our neighbors' limited resources before we spend it. And Ms. McFadden, I really do. I appreciate you noticing that. And like I said, I'm totally supportive of your motion.
Fair enough. Anything else?
I think Mr. Granger, I'm not sure if it's appropriate.
Mr. Granger, Commissioner Cummings, did you have?
Well, no, Your Honor, I just agree that I think as board members, we've just got to make sure that we avoid even the appearance of impropriety. And I think considering that motion, we'll be avoiding the appearance. And of course, perception is 100, well, a larger percent of reality. So I think, and just from know we as attorneys, we have to avoid the appearance of impropriety. So I think we will have done that with this amendment. We will do that.
Mr. Granger, were you trying to get our attention?
Well, Ms. Watson, with the Florida Children's Council pointed out to me that say no percentage of their budget, there may be a case rising sometime when, for instance, Full Child Leon wants to conduct an event, and they are the fiscal agent for the event that was sponsored by us. In that case, some of their budget, if we pay them to be fiscal agent or remunerate way, would preclude them from being fiscal agent.
But actually, this is only speaking to us.
Board member.
The board.
Only as to the
It
board.
says no member. And if at the beginning of the conflict of interest, it says members of the council. And I mean, continues to refer to the 10 of
Specific to
us.
these people here.
But the hospital does a healthcare board.
We just can't receive funding from the CSC. We just can't receive funding from the CSC.
Right.
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 Yep.
All right. I think we're following the implication. I think everybody understands. Any other questions, concerns, comments, discussion? Dr. Glenn?
This is really brief, but just to make it clear, because several people asked the question, but just say no member of the council, just to make it clear, shall serve as a staff or board member of any agency.
Good.
Does that make sense?
That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Well, except that it's got to be an agency that receives funding from the council.
Well, right.
Right.
That's the further in the sentence. I think
Correct.
you're
But I'm just correcting the beginning of the sentence because several people are questioning which
Oh.
members. So just to be clear, no members of the council
And A, B, and C all start with
that way.
members of the
Correct.
council.
Yeah.
So
That's why I want to keep it.
Consistent.
no
consistent.
members
These are
of the
our-
council.
Correct.
All right, fair enough. All right. So any other discussion? Question? So that it's moved and seconded that we make this change to the Article 7, Section D, conflict of interest to exclude any board member from serving as a staff member, board agency funded by the Children's Services Council of Leon County. Any objection to that change now? All right, so we'll show that that change passes unanimously. Any other discussions? Thank you so much, Member McFadden, for bringing that to our attention. Anything else on the bylaws? Any other discussion, changes, corrections to the bylaws? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the bylaws as amended.
I'll second.
Adopted, moved and seconded, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Sox, you were too slow, Dr. Glenn. Any other discussions? Any other questions, concerns, correction? All right, any objection to the passage of the motion? The motion passes unanimously. We now have bylaws. We now have an interim administrator. It's about time to start working on the end of my term as chair.
Not so fast.
So committees, we've approved the bylaws. Budget committees, we don't have a budget committee, and I think we need one.
Judge, now that we have a treasurer, we do have a chair of a budget committee.
That's true, Mr. Mitchell. We have a chair, and I will say the chair of the council is a member of every committee, I think. Is that right?
As treasurer, he presides over the council budget planning committee and serves as a member of the executive committee. Very impressive.
Of course,
All I had to do was show up today.
how many, I mean, honestly, how many committees do we need? There's only 10 of us. I would, I was going to say I would propose to serve on the budget committee. And we need other people who are willing to serve on it.
Could, Mr. Hannah, would you consider serving on the budget committee?
I would be honored.
Yeah, I think this would be a very good.
I agree.
Mr. Cummings, any interest in being on the budget committee?
I will, Your Honor.
Excellent. Follow.
I've got a committee.
What's that? All right. So is that enough of a committee? 4 of us? Anybody else interested in serving on the budget committee? Vice chair? No, swing and a miss? All right. So the proposal is that the budget committee would be chaired by Mitchell, Cummings, Hannah, and Scherstrom. All right, so Mitchell, Cummings, Hannah, and Scherstrom, any discussion? Any objection? So we'll show our budget committee constituted, Mitchell, Cummings, Hannah, and Scherstrom. Hopefully, Ms. Taylor Goodman, will be an easier meeting to schedule. All right.
And Judge, from our last meeting, I understand that this committee then would put together the preliminary budget from which we would have our trim number estimate from.
That's correct. And Mr. Granger, I think, is going to discuss this here in some detail in just a minute. I had hoped to have a preliminary budget, proposed budget for you to consider today, but we don't have it. I'm just perfectly candid with you. Mr. Granger can explain the machinations that we tried to go through to establish you'll have a useful document by the 15th. A document that I gave you today would not be useful, I think. So we don't have a proposed budget for you. Mr. Granger, do you want to go ahead and discuss the budgeting process and sort of what you've gone through to this point and what you're looking forward to having to us by the 15th? I think that's a good plan. I think that's an excellent plan. The two are interrelated. Before we get, so why don't we save the budget discussion until we get to trim, move on to. So this is where I think we're getting to have too many committees. What the proposal is at the moment is for a nomination and governance committee and a CEO search committee, 2 different committees. I don't think we need 2 different committees. I think we need one committee that whose main first job is going to be the CEO search. So what I would do first is entertain a motion to collapse those 2 into one committee.
So moved.
Is there a second? Excellent. Moved by
I was.
moved by O'Brien, seconded by Dr. Glenn. Any discussion, any objection?
Judge, I have a question. Would this committee be different than the executive committee, and why couldn't the executive committee perform these duties?
Yet another committee collapsed into one committee.
The executive committee already exists. Couldn't it perform these
Does the
duties?
executive committee already exist?
It's in the bylaws,
Look at
clearly.
that. All right.
I mean, it's the chair, the vice chair, and the treasurer. So it already is established by nature of it being the executive committee. I don't, if you wanted people outside of that, then I understand having a different committee, but I wondered if that committee could do these tasks.
So let me ask this, is anyone else interested in serving on the committee that would have the responsibility of hiring the CEO?
I nominate Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, so
So in
Clearly, we
fairness,
need a
though,
different committee for
it isn't hiring the person, unlike when, right,
Bring the
or
nomination.
bringing several recommendations to the.
I mean, we don't have a process at all for establishing a search committee, advertising, employing somebody to, if we want to hire a firm to help us, we have established no process. This is the entity that would establish the process for hiring the permanent executive officer.
To miss, and not really because I'm a mile on it, but that is typically what an executive committee does. And so when we get to the point where we're going to put a search out, if there are those on full body who want to serve, we can certainly add them. But that is what an executive committee typically does, is we'll go through and bring to the board 1, 2, 3 recommendations for their consideration. And now all of the board members would have the ability to look through all of the applications. And if there's one that wasn't brought forward, would have the ability to ask that they be interviewed at the same time in sort of this very awkward way that we have to do it publicly. That's, again, sort of the method by which other organizations operate.
Any other discussion of the proposal that the executive committee serves the same function as the nominations and governance?
And the executive committee is just the chair, the vice chair, and the treasurer, or can you
Yeah.
add?
With the understanding that if there is any board member who at the time we put this is on a going forward basis, because and maybe the executive director only serves for 3 years and we have to do it again. But if there's a member of the board who would like to participate in that, and throw your name in the hat. But hopefully it's not something we do on a very regular basis. And this will be our one time for my lifetime, at least.
I just want to make sure there's a process in which we have an opportunity to see, who are the potential nominees and provide some input. And as long as we can guarantee that happens, then I'm fine with the 3 executive committee members doing that, but ensuring that there is a process that gives us time to look at it, review it, and provide feedback.
Yeah, I'm assuming that any final decision has to be made by the board in its totality.
But even the process of how.
Even the process, because I am assuming that the executive committee creates the short list, correct?
Right.
And then, so I would like to see the full list.
I will say this, again, only having gone through this in the past in sort of public bodies, you would see every applicant. The applicants the first stage would be those who qualify, whatever the qualifications that we come up with. And I think that the executive committee would have a requirement to bring the qualifications to the board for consideration. Any can be added or subtracted. So the first step would be all applications in. Those that meet the requirements, great, they move forward. All of the board members would have access to their resumes and could pick up the phone and call. The executive committee, if in the absence of everybody doing that, could kind of go through and make a recommendation of 1, 2, or 3. And again, my point earlier is if any member of the board, let's say that there were two people brought forward for consideration. Any member of the board said, I'm sorry, but you missed Jane. And I think Jane should have an opportunity. I think that Jane should have an opportunity. And that mirrors what the governor and cabinet do when they hire an insurance commissioner. So I'm sort of using that model, but I think all of us should have. I don't think it should be, just the executive committee. It's just a sort of a way of making it cleaner and easier.
Just to make it simple, at the deference of the executive committee, when that CEO search process commences, I would like to be a part of that. I'd volunteer my services.
And here's the other part about it too. All of the meetings of the executive committee, of course, will be open, public, advertised meetings, just like these meetings are. But the truth of the matter is, for me anyway, I want this to be a consensus-based board. I don't want to be a part of anything that doesn't operate. It operates, like you say, do everything the right way for the right reason. And I can't begin to imagine that the executive committee is not going to permit and demand the input of every board. But Commissioner Cummings, you wanted to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor. My question is, at what point or will a decision be made whether or not to hire a firm to do the advertisement for the position, or whether to do it internally with the interim executive director? At what point will we make that decision?
This, for me, is a good question for Mr. Granger. I've thought through this, but to me, I think this is really what we should be relying on our interim administrator to make a proposal to us, and then we give him guidance and set policy and consider the pros and cons. But the answer is I don't know. Mr. Granger, do you have thoughts about it?
Yes, actually, given the timeframes that we're under to get everything done, particularly the budgets, but the basics of an office, equipment, another person or two, certainly an executive help me, and do all of the things that you'll see in my PowerPoint in terms of deliverables, see in my contract. It seemed to me that it would be most expeditious in terms of getting this search off the ground ASAP to hire a firm to do it. I have no idea what that cost will be. Certainly, if it's out of the ballpark, then it's not something we should do. But my recommendation would be that if I find a firm who's willing and able to do it and provide you the information about the firm and what they will do, then it would be up to you, of course, that should be a budget item.
So we have an association of Children's Services Council that speaks loudly in throughout the state of Florida, and I think that they will probably do a good job of helping us advertise by word of mouth this position. I also think that Leon County can help us, and I think the 10 board members can send out the word that we're looking for a executive director of the Children's Services Council. I'm sort of a tightwad when it comes to other people's money, and it would be convenient, but I think it's something that we can do on our own. That's just my thought, that we can advertise and we can, again, the real tough part is coming up with the qualifications that the 10 of us are looking for. And a headhunting firm typically takes a percentage of the salary multiplied by usually a 3, sometimes a 5-year period. Like I'll do that. And I'll do it for free. I think this is a well-known enough entity that we'll be able to advertise, and we don't need a headhunter going out and spending money that I would much rather. And the school board member's not here anymore, but I'd much rather go to District 3 and helping those kids than I would headhunting from.
Thanks very much. Any other discussion about it?
Your Honor, I just would like to add, and I agree with Mr. Mitchell, but perhaps we could give our interim executive director the opportunity to just bring those options back. If he can explore what firms would charge, and that way we would have something definitive, you know, to compare it to, and then we can make an informed decision. So I would like to just give him that allowance to do that so that we can be very informed.
And whether there's value in those services, whether they cast a net broad or give us a better pool of
Absolutely.
applicants or something along those lines. But fair enough, not a decision that we need to make at this moment, I don't think. Ms. McFadden?
Lean in on when you go through this process. I think the key thing is, what are the key qualifications we're looking for? Not just a job description. What is the type of person that we want to serve? And if we could have those qualifications brought back to us, I think it makes the process much easier. Is it a skilled communicator? Is it somebody who has, do they need to have expertise in children's backgrounds? And I chair several nom and gov committees, so I'm more than happy to share some materials we use on a national level to go through this process. I think that might be really helpful. And I'm with Paul, Mr. Mitchell. These firms are usually extremely expensive. And I think that as well connected as this board is, we're going to get more folks coming at us than we're going to know what to do with.
I suspect you may be correct. All right.
I hope so.
outstanding.
I really do.
I think we will.
I think this is a great job, by the way. I really, and I think there are a lot of people in this community and the surrounding communities who think the same thing and have an interest in it. I've certainly heard from plenty of people who have an idea of, my Aunt Ethel. I'm kidding with that, but not my Aunt.
All right, very good. So
So Judge, we were in
I
a
forget what we're
discussion
on. Go
part
ahead.
of, there was a motion, there was a second, and we were discussing whether or not to collapse the committees to the rule of the executive committee.
seems like a long time.
Mr.
ago.
Sachs.
It does, but I wanted to kind of get you back to where we were.
I appreciate it very much. I need all the help I
Was
can
that-
get.
Does there need to be a motion on the table? Does there need to be a motion to make those changes?
I think the other motion would have to be withdrawn in order for us to get out of discussion. So we're,
All right, any other discussion? All right, so the motion on the table is collapse the nomination and governance and CEO search committee into the executive committee. There's been a motion and a second. Oh, wait, Dr. Glenn?
As long as there are provisions for the board members to provide feedback to ensure that they can look at all of the members that are being submitted for the executive committee's decision or review.
So
Oh, you talking about the search?
Prior to so I would say what you're looking for is prior to even going out for a search, that the executive committee would bring for consideration to the board the process by which we're going to do that. Included in that
Correct,
is the sentiment
to
that
ensure that
everybody has.
is included. Absolutely.
And I'm not sure, Your Honor, if that might not be two separate things. We're talking about collapsing these two committees into the executive committee. And I think what board member Dr. Glenn is talking about is the search for a permanent executive director, which is two different things, I think. So I
Yeah,
think we
so-
might need two motions,
So, yeah, and what I'm wondering is if we don't need to charge that committee to come back with language describing the process of the
think-
search. So the only question on the table is one committee or three committees?
Right.
All right, is that? All right. Any other discussion? Any other questions? Any objection to the executive committee serving as the responsibility of nomination and governance and the CEO search? Seeing no objections, the motion passes unanimously. And now, Mr. Granger, we're on trim Florida Department of Revenue's Truth in Millage. The first part of this is just the webinars. I sent this around. There are webinars on the Truth in Millage process, June 9th, 15th, and 23rd. I have registered 2 hours of your life. I strongly encourage everybody to sign up for one of the webinars. If you don't have it, we'll send around an email after the meeting again. Please sign up so that we are all as educated as we can be on the truth. And
Judge, you said the 23rd is now the 22nd?
the meeting is now the 22nd.
The
Still.
the webinar is still the 23rd?
As far as I know, yes.
I know we do have a meeting on the 22nd. I want to make sure that we weren't contradicting that.
That's correct.
We would be better off watching the webinar before the 22nd. I would agree.
So don't sign up for the 23rd.
Thank you. That's right. Sign up for the 9th or the 15th. But if you can't make those, the 23rd is better than nothing. All right. So that's it for that. Where are we on the trim process? I did send the notice to the property appraiser that we intend to participate in levying millage this year. I got back a confirmation from them. They responded that we need by mid-June to tell the property appraiser our primary and secondary contacts for completing and signing trim forms. I'm going to propose that we tell them the treasurer and the interim administrator as our primary and secondary contacts. Is that acceptable to everybody? Treasurer. And that's part of my effort to, again, separate myself under the statutory requirement from participating in the setting of millage. All right, so without objection, treasurer and Mr. Granger will be sent to the property appraiser as our primary and secondary contacts. All right, so now I'm going to ask Vice Chair Connor to take over the remainder of our substantive trim discussion. And this is, again, I'm going to separate myself under the statutory limit on the judge from the setting of millage. Vice Chair Connor.
Okay, so at this time, we're going to discuss two policy issues, one of which is how much the council should spend on programming for the fiscal year of 21-22, and then how much should the council invest or budget for a reserve. So the last time we met, we had a good conversation about if we were going to decide between going for the full meal as we are authorized to by statute. However, in this meeting, we're going to discuss the two things that I aforementioned, which is how much program funding will we invest in the community in the fiscal year, and how much of that reserve will we budget for the reserve. So based on our discussion today, the budget committee will craft the 2021-22 budget, and that will be used to help determine the millage rate that we'll request through the trim process. In addition to that, a tentative budget will be created so that we can present to the county commission by July 1. And so Ted has prepared a presentation to share with us to help guide our conversation afterwards.
Thank you, Principal Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Granger.
So as the principal said, we've got two budgets that we're going to be having to do very, very quickly. We've got our startup budget that's going to be based on the $400,000 that the county is going to be loaning us. That budget will run from June through November. And then we've got to create a tentative 2021-2022 budget that will begin in November and be based on what revenues are generated by the millage that you request. On August 4th, on July 1, we need to provide that tentative budget, 21-22 budget to the county commission. On August 4th, you're going to need to request the millage rate to the property appraiser. And finally, in September, to adopt the actual budget, because it'll probably go through some permutations. But in terms of the millage rate that you are going to suggest to the property appraiser on August 4th, that will to a very large extent be based on the amount of money that you would like to invest into programs during the first year. So the budget committee and I can put together an operating budget. You know, what's office space going to be, et cetera. The real issue that is the unknown at this point is how much you want to invest in the program arena. So the two questions, as Vice Chair Connor mentioned a moment ago, for you that you'll discuss after this presentation is how much money should you invest in programs next year, and how much should you budget for in reserves in excess of the 5% required contingency fund that's in statute. So looking at programs and how much to invest, it seemed to me as I was putting this together that all of us would probably like to put all $9 or $10 million into the community right now, because we all know there is significant need out there in so many ways. But the limiting factor is, of course, the capacity to do it in a way that exhibits the due diligence that we need to have if we're going to do it appropriately, with the outcomes, the accountability, the transparency, et cetera, that the council is going to need to have. Just as an aside, we were notified earlier this week by the property appraiser what each mill or what the mills would generate, and you can see there that ultimately, for next year, it's projected at close to $10 million that you would have at your disposal to invest in operations and in programs. I'm not anticipating the operations will be a significant percentage of that total. So most of it would go into programs. You don't have the deliverables today, so I just hit on the high points of my deliverables. But when I have provided them, it's about 3.5, 4 pages of the basic stuff of starting an office, plus the other things of starting a CSC. Kind of some of the high points are the trim workshops. Next meeting, I'm going to be suggesting that we set our first September public hearing date, because we're going to have that at the end of the month, next month, for the property appraiser. The executive search, facilities, staff, office equipment, legal, accounting, a service plan, other directives that you may have. So that's going to be a lot. As I said, you'll see it next week. It's about 3.5 pages of things that need to be done in the next 5-6 months. Not included in that, in terms of ensuring that the council has the capacity to appropriately put this money on the streets. These things that I'm going to talk about over the next slide or two are things that need to be done. We need to figure out a community engagement strategy for the community, for residents, stakeholder input. We need to provide training. We have to have a data system that identifies the outcomes that you want and provides for a process for providers to input their data, so that we have the data that you need to determine where the needs are and what should be funded and what the outcomes are. Priority investment areas need to be adopted by you all. An allocation timeframe, competitive solicitations, a competitive grant process. That data system and accountability outcome monitoring are one of the most, if not the most important, what you would like. The evidence-based standards that need to be used and a continuum throughout the programs that you have, and the guiding principles for CSC agency relationships. So that's quite a bit to be done in terms of making sure and having the foundation set to ensure that when you put money on the streets, you're going to know how it's being spent, et cetera. The other, in addition to the program funding, And all of those capacity issues relate to the program funding. The other issue that you'll be talking about in a minute is the reserve and the contingency fund. Statute requires a contingency fund. 5% is what is the best practice that has been used by the CSCs around the state. In terms of other CSCs, there are 4 CSCs or children's trusts that serve about the same population as Leon County. There's Escambia, Alachua, Martin, and St. Lucie. Oh, I don't have the information on St. Lucie here, although they did provide for the contingency fund. But Martin County, their first year, they didn't ask for program money because they wanted to get that foundation set. They did get the contingency fund. That 5% contingency fund was based upon their operations budget, so it's based on the entire budget. Alachua, we heard from Colin Murphy, the CEO there a couple of weeks ago, and he said it was $300 that they put into programs. Well, those programs were continuation programs that the advisory board that helped to push for their creation had actually established. So they already had a lot of the accountability, the reporting, the data issues largely resolved with those organizations. And of course, they did the 5% contingency fund as required. Escambia is behind us, and so it's to be determined what they would like to do. In hopes of helping you look at options that you can merge and blend as you deem appropriate, I put together 3 options. You've already indicated, and the judge has filed the paperwork to say you want to get the millage. That millage can be used just for operating budgets. It appeared to me as you spoke that you also wanted to try to get some money on the streets as soon as possible to keep that momentum going. So option 1 is taking the time to build that administrative structure and the foundation for the future during the next 6 months and during the 21-22 year. Building the processes of people, getting everything into place, and providing a small investment into proven programs that have shown they have the accountability, that they have the wherewithal to generate the outcomes that you want, that have program parameters that they may remain true, and the fidelity of the program is such that we know it's going to generate the outcomes that they say they're going to for the dollars. The pros of that, of course, is that it allows you the opportunity to build that foundation as the others did. But it also provides funds, since you've got the contingency fund and maybe a little bit left over from the investment, to deal with immediate needs or emergencies. We heard from Alachua this last year that during their first year, they didn't put money into programs, but they did have a reserve during last year when COVID came out to put some money, to invest some money in immediate needs to help students who were struggling with virtual learning, for instance. The next option is basically that first option of building that foundation, having a little bit more emergency, some money for programs, but also building reserves over and above the 5% contingency. That would provide more money for those immediate needs. It would provide an opportunity if you feel that you're at a place where the organizational foundation is such that you can invest some money, you would have it. It also provides a little bit more money if during next year the new CEO finds a building that would be a great deal to have an office in. And things like that. Build a little bit more reserve for that. Of course, one of the cons of that is public perception, and Councilman Cummings, you mentioned the perception. Some may perceive that as, you're taking our money and you're putting it in the bank and I need to pay my bills, budget what you need. And that really plays out into option number 3, which is those first 2, except putting a slew of money into reserves in case that building comes, or a hurricane comes, or there's other issues that lead you to want to invest more money into the community. You can see there what the pros are. Martin County, actually, they didn't get money in their first year, but in their subsequent years, they built their reserves up to the point where rather than basing their program funding on the projections of tax money that was going to come in during that year, they have enough in reserves to where they're funding their programs out of the reserves and then backfilling that money from the current year. So there's more stability in their funding for providers, et cetera. It seemed to me the biggest con on that is the issue that I mentioned with the second one in terms of large reserves is, we're in tight times for many, many taxpayers, and building a reserve of a significant size may be seen as contrary to what they intended when they voted for the CSC. Those are quick options that kind of provide you a mix and match of things. The two questions again that you're going to discuss now are how much money should you invest in programs, given the capacity issues, and how much you should we should budget for excess contingency over and above the 5% that's required for emergencies. Once you make that decision today, as Vice Chair Connor said, I will take your decision to the Budget Committee over the next 10 days before the next meeting and craft a 2021-22 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. All right, so now the floor is open for discussion.
I'd like to just start with some clarification. Ted, if you wouldn't mind staying there, I could maybe just bounce some ideas off of you. In our bylaws, it establishes our fiscal year as October 1 to September 30th. The property appraiser, I believe, told us that our revenues will not appear till November. I don't know how other CSCs handle it, but having that October month not funded every fiscal year seems to be a challenge. And that when you're considering a reserve, you might want to consider about 8.5% or 1/12 of your budget to overlap into the next fiscal year to pay for October till you get your revenues again in November, so that you don't have a September 30 crisis every year. You eliminate it by taking your first year and allowing a 13-month plan for your, I know your budget is going to be October 1 to September 30th. That's our fiscal year. You can't ignore that.
Yes.
But our funding won't appear to the next November. So I would think in consideration, we'd want about an 8.5% on top of the 5% contingency to be available to us for the next year, because revenues won't appear till November. Is that a fair
8.5%
discussion?
representing 1 month, right?
Say again?
8.5% representing 1 month.
Yes, that gap is huge, and it is that's an excellent point.
I think in the first year, you could eliminate a lot of years of problems by dealing with that, because you might not necessarily have the same program needs in your first year as you will in your out years.
So for clarification, the 5% contingency fund represents how much?
It depends on what amount of money you seek in the millage. It would be 5% of that. So if you request $1 million to fund operations and X amount for operations, X amount for programs, your 5% is based on that total.
So the 5% is not a set amount. It could be a range depending
Correct.
on what we set the bigger target at.
It could also be a dollar amount. It doesn't have to be a percentage.
Yeah, it doesn't, as long as you meet that minimum 5%, which is best
I
practice.
assume that's what the budget committee is going to, one of the things they're going to do is tell us what that desired contingency reserve would be in addition to the direction we want to take. Right?
Yeah, and I think, this to me is, this is why the 10 of us got appointed, is to have this conversation. And I think you've done a really nice job, Mr. Granger, of giving us options. I want to go on record. I will vote against a building every single time I sit here. If it's ever proposed, not only will I vote against it, but that's not what we're here for. So if anybody's got a building for sale and they'd like to give it to us, I'm happy to take it. So I just want to, every time I hear that, I don't know if you saw me, but my neck just, ooh. And when the guy from Alachua County said it, I thought, you're a year and a half in and you're proposing a building?
So the plane is out of the deal, no plane for the.
I'm a little wishy-washy on this issue, in case you didn't notice. So I do want to make that point.
Yeah.
The second point is that the base budget, the administrative nature. One, Mr. Granger, based on your resume, we are getting you for a deal. And that is the kind of thing that we should be looking for. And I appreciate the fact that you're standing at this podium, you're willing to take on this job for a 6-month period or 7 months or whatever it ends up being. We are getting a good deal because one of the reasons I asked the question about is this just a contract employee or benefits? $50,000. That's fantastic. So I appreciate that. The administrative side of the budget is kind of easy for us to do. But I would say that the 10 of us should talk about the options and in terms of, if we're going to spend money, not only would I like to know which programs are out there that are currently being served, as Ms. Fritz had mentioned in her comments during the public comment period. I mean, I'd like to see a list of the services being provided to kids. I'd like to really understand what the gaps are. I looked at an overview that was done for Orange County. It was a group out of Leon County, actually. I can't remember their name, but they were the ones who did the assessment for Orange County and whether or not they were going to create a Children's Services Council. What they found was there's huge needs out there. Many of those needs could be met some other way. Some of them can't. I think our job is to find the ones that can't and fill those needs. And as Mr. Granger was talking about the accountability components, how do we want to grade them? What are we hoping to accomplish? The 10 of us have never had this conversation. And Mr. Hanna, this is why I took exception with your motion last week. Not that I don't want at some point the full millage rate to go out, because I think there is a $10 million a year need. Just don't know what it is yet. And I think it's really important that, one, we establish what the needs are, what sort of grade we're going to give to people who we're giving our neighbors money to, and establishing that first before we start talking about programs is important to me. Now, I say that, but I also know that things come up, and you mentioned hurricanes. As an old insurance guy, I'm very familiar with Mother Nature and the impact that it can have on this state. And when things like a hurricane or COVID hit, you're like, why the heck didn't we just raise a little bit more money? And so I look at this and I think, Mr. Sachs, what a great idea. How forward thinking you are to know that we're going to always have that 1 month lag time. So building, that 8%, 8.5%, building our contingency amount, building our administrative costs, and then recognizing that every year it seems there's a COVID or hurricane, something happens. And gosh, if we had just thought a little ahead of time, and knowing that if it doesn't happen, it could be rolled into the next year. And I wouldn't have a problem looking at my neighbors and saying, I asked for that money, not so we could spend it, but in the event that the need occurred, we could spend it. And the final thing I'll say is, I would like to spend taxpayer dollars on doing a really solid assessment. Ms. Fritz raises a very good point, and this is from a Whole Child Leon annual report. This is a board I sat on. We're not perfect. That was not Whole Child Leon's job. They didn't get paid, $150,000 to do a full assessment. So there are bound to be errors, as Ms. Fritz points out, not just in Whole Child Leon's, but in the advisory committee that ultimately proposed that this body be created and recommended it to the voters. So that's where I am. I guess I'm sort of on option one with one exception, and that is I don't know of a program that I want to raise my hand and say that's the one I want yet.
So I'm sure all of us are going to want to weigh in on this conversation. And is it okay if I jump in after Mr. Mitchell? You know my position, you know where I stood at the last meeting, and I will be there throughout this process. And if we're prepared to make that vote today, then I'm prepared to do that. When I was principal at Leon High School for many years, I was always saying, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money in education. And then in 2012, was brought out to Pensacola Street and started looking around and said, man, there's a lot of money out here. And just in my humble opinion, some of it was being mismanaged and misspent and spent on buildings and administrative, or as my father-in-law would say, fat cat salaries. And so I've worked really hard during my time managing a $500 million budget over the last 5 years to eliminate what I consider to be wasteful spending at the district level and to push those resources down to our schools, into our classrooms, and to reward our teachers and our other employees. And while $9 or $10 million may sound like a lot of money, at the end of the day, it's really not. And there are many, many programs in our community. I think the thing we have to be careful, we have to be very targeted in where those dollars are going to be allocated, because if not, you end up with a bunch of people with their hands in a cookie jar, and everybody just comes out with a bunch of crumbs. And so while I may be a registered Democrat, not that this is about politics, I am very fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. I think you need to know that, Mr. Mitchell. In addition, I went back and looked at the Supervisor of Elections office, and I read the referendum as the voters read it before they voted. And it said, should the Children's Services Council of Leon County be established to provide children with early learning and reading skills development, treatment, preventative, and other children's services in Leon County as a special district with an ad valorem taxing authority limited to $0.5 mil annually, and independent oversight and accountability as required by law, unless until the district is dissolved and specified in Florida statute. There were 152,000 votes cast on that initiative. Over 100,000 residents in Leon County supported the $0.5 mil, or up to $0.5 mil. It's my proposal that in the first year, we do impose the $0.5 mil and do what basically Martin County did and build seed money to then evaluate programs and then to budget out the money that we've already raised through taxpayer dollars to fund those programs. It's a lot easier for us to come back a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and to reduce from 0.5 to 0.3 or 0.2 or whatever it is, than it's going to be for us to start low and every year go up another mil. I firmly believe that. I think this gives us a chance to raise the $9 to $10 million for the first year, us to evaluate programs, then budget that money out while we're continuing to raise money for the next year. That's where I stand.
Well, let me, go ahead,
No.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, we've got on the agenda the TRIM webinars for all of us. I guess it was my understanding that once we all went through the TRIM webinars, then we would discuss the millage rate or how to set it. So we doing that today. It's just for clarification.
So for purposes of the agenda says, like Florida's trend. And then the subject is the webinar. I think, and Mr. Granger, maybe Mr. Granger can address it. I think with Mr. Granger, and I probably should have made the agenda more direct. I think Mr. Granger's point is that for us to do a budget in time for July 1, we got to start making. Mr. Granger might. I think the problem is the agenda. I don't think the problem is the decision.
Well, it's kind of a, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'll listen to your answer.
It's kind of a circular thing. Need to decide what millage rate you're going to request, but before you decide what millage rate you're going to request, you have to decide how much money you want to spend. And so for purposes of this discussion, it's to determine how much money would you like to spend on programs or budget for reserves. And from that, we can determine if it's a 0.05 millage rate or a 1.2 millage rate, et cetera.
Let me,
Can I continue on this just for a minute? Okay. It seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that we're just sort of right now at this minute, putting the cart before the horse. I don't believe I have enough information to make an informed decision about tax expenditure of taxpayers' money, to make a decision about what millage rate we should adopt initially. Looking back at the statute primarily says, once the council has been constituted, once the officers have been, voted upon, which I think we have our last officer today, the treasurer, it says immediately, it doesn't say 6 months, 2 months, 2 weeks, it says immediately the council shall be engaged in a needs assessment. Now, I know all of us on this council, we have our various professions, we're experts in certain areas, but I don't know if any of us are capable of performing a needs assessment or even giving an opinion today of what the specific needs are in Leon County as it relates to our children. Now, the other thing the statute says, and I know you all know this, is that we cannot use this money for supplantation. So we cannot supplant what's already being provided. So me as a member of the Children's Services Council, I would like to know where those loopholes are. I would like to know where the most needs are. And having that information, then I think we can properly assess how much funds we need to expend this year, we need to expend next year based on a projection of trying to address those most vulnerable, trying to address where those needs are. Right now, I don't know. Now, I think the council committee did a great job in their own right in submitting their over 100-page report of their study. There are other groups, I know Mr. Mitchell is on other groups that have done studies, reports of the needs of the children in Leon County. And I think those are good starting points. But I believe we need a professional entity that has experience in performing these assessments, Your Honor, before we can make an informed decision. I want to be informed.
So
And right now,
I'm trying to drive some structure to this conversation, bring some structure to it. First of all, let me make a comment. I don't believe we change lives with buildings. We change lives with programs. So I agree that we should never spend dollars on building infrastructure or buying infrastructure that doesn't go to support programs that will impact our community and in particular impact children. That being said, I won't say that there's not enough money in the world to solve all of our problems with children, but I will absolutely say that 9 million, $2 million is not enough to do it. And at some point in time, I think we absolutely are going to look at pulling down that full millage to address programs as much as we can address, because 9 million, 2 million is not that much. But to do that, I think we need to understand what our needs are. I think we need to have a detailed understanding of where those needs lie and how we can best, from a metrically driven perspective, address those in a way that's going to have the most benefit to our community through improving the lives of our children. I don't think we can just toss it all over because there's not enough there. We need to be able to understand what's going to drive the most progress. I mean, one of the things we learned in health, in my business is in healthcare, is you can do 3 things that will move a mile. You can do 1,000 things that will move an inch. Identify those 3 things that are going to move a mile. It may not be day one, it may be over a period, but we need to figure out those things that are going to carry the most weight. Put measurements in place and drive that forward. That said, as we look at the millage, I think our first responsibility is what we've been told. We've got to assess the needs. We have to have a clear needs assessment in line. We also need to understand what the timing of that is, because what we don't want to do is do the needs assessment and be finished 6 months into the year and then twiddle our thumbs until we run around for the next year programmatically. I don't think we need to pull the full funds down, but we need to understand how much a comprehensive needs assessment is going to cost. And then recognize that there are probably some programs that we'll want to initiate, unless we think it's going to take a full year to do a needs assessment. I hope it doesn't take that long. But that we may want to start initially putting some programs in place. We don't want to spend it all in 6 months, if it takes us 6 months to do it, because then we won't be able to sustain that rate of spend on the years ahead. So looking kind of prospectively at this, I think we need to identify what we think our administrative costs are going to be. This is a task to you. What we think a needs assessment is going to be, what our contingency requirements are going to be on a moving forward basis, and then start identifying at least some funding for programmatic implementation during this first part of the year. And then as we move forward from there, we can determine when do we start pulling, because I do think, I don't think it needs to be day one, but I think at some point in time, we need to understand that, yes, we've been given a responsibility, we have these resources, and we're going to want to use all of those resources to have the biggest impact and get the biggest return for our community. So that being said, I would, again, project what our administrative fees are going to be, project what the cost is for a comprehensive needs assessment, understand what our contingency requirements are going to be, and then recognizing that there may be some programmatic implementation in this first year. What do we think we're going to slide into, scale up? And that's the projection I would like to see be brought back to this group.
I would like
Okay.
to add to that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Please, I'm sorry. Okay. I completely agree that, when we were talking about the budget and what would the budget be, I kept on saying budget for what? Like, I don't know what we're spending this money on. So I think it's very important that we do set that needs assessment. But to take it beyond that, the programs that are already in place, like what are those programs funding? And what should those programs be doing? So I think we should go beyond just the needs assessment, but a program assessment also. What programs are currently available that we are not tapping into that we can, really harness? So there needs to be a 2 parts to that needs assessment. What are the gaps? And then what are the programs and what are those additional services? And then I would like to see us kind of map out a strategy for each of the gaps that we identify. So what is the strategy? What needs to happen to fill that gap? What's the logic model that's in place? Because once we identify the gaps, we can't just throw money at it. We need to systematically think through what's the strategy to approach that. So as we identify these things, I want a lot of thought into strategically, how do we address this? What programs can we tap into and what else needs to be done? And I don't remember the gentleman that spoke earlier, but what are some of the innovative ways that we can approach those beyond programs that are already in place? And how do we get the community involved with those? So I agree, the needs assessment needs to be done, but beyond further. And when I look at the options that you provide, I'm leaning more towards option 2 because I do think the money is going to be needed. I don't know how we're going to spend $10 million, but I know we're going to have to spend something. I would like to have some money prepared and ready to do that, some money ready. And then once we know what needs to be done, then we can go to the community and say, we know we need this $10 million. Here's how we're going to spend it. And I would feel a lot more comfortable doing that.
As a point of clarification, I'm wondering for the budget committee, if it might make sense to go back, and we're talking about 2 fiscal years here. You have June through October, which is the first fiscal year, which I assume has the needs assessment and the initial pieces in it that are more administrative. And then does that buy us enough time, if the group could come back with that, to then look at when could that needs assessment be completed and when do we have to make the decisions on the program pieces? And I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I think when you look at the areas that have been most successful, they've been able to say, these are the 3 policy things we're going to change. You know, whether it's everybody enters kindergarten ready to read, and we're supporting the school system, and that's going to have a long-term effect, or whether it's going to be no, deaths, of children by the age of 2, or whatever those are that we decide are those gaps. If we drive toward all of our programming toward those gaps, we're going to make a difference. But we're not ready to do that yet. And I agree with you 100%. So I'm just wondering, could we do it in baby steps and do for the next meeting, have the first budget that just goes through October and give ourselves a little breathing room to digest all of this and continue the conversation?
Commissioner Cummings, did you have another comment?
No.
We do have to have that tentative 21-22 budget to the county. Now it's tentative budget. I have spoken to a couple of folks, and I will be in my email to each of you about legal services and CPA services. I will inquire too about services like this, but I've spoken with one organization that sounds like it might be just what we need. And depending on my negotiations with them and the procurement issues that are going to drive how we end up securing legal and et cetera, I might be able to provide a presentation by that company on at our 15th meeting, and they've addressed everything that y'all have brought up and more.
Okay, I have a question. So today, our goal was to first figure out how much we're going to invest in programming, and then the reserve portion. Can we not do some of this in tandem when it comes to the needs assessment? I have no idea how much a needs assessment costs, but I do agree that that is something that we need to know. Data supports everything, that drives everything that I do, and I know that that's the way that we want to go. Is there a way, because I know time is of essence here, we have to have this budget to the committee so that the committee can do their job in order for us to meet that deadline for July 1. How might we figure all of that out at the same time is what I'm trying to get at. Getting that needs assessment done, is it something, because I don't know, is that something that can be done relatively fast and meet our budget?
Well, there's definitely a needs assessment, but as one of y'all mentioned, there's also where are the gaps? Where's the funding? There are going to be significant federal dollars coming into this community. Childcare budget is going to double, and then that money's gone in 2 years. Strategically, how might the council address that? There's an inventory of programs. Who's out there? What are they doing? Who are they doing it with? What, et cetera, et cetera. So it will take some time to do it, but I'm optimistic that if we hire the right group or groups to do this, certainly it can be done by November. But we have to provide the final budget in the trim process in September. Whether we can do this by September, I don't know. That's a lot of work. Certainly we can use the existing needs assessments that have been done, including the recent one by Whole Child. But they need updates, and there's additional information that can be provided. And then in terms of funding services, how do we tie that in? How do y'all tie that into, okay, well, what exact programs do we want? And then the administrative side, I guess, is what's the system that we create for soliciting the grants, funding the grants, determining the data that we want and the metrics that we want and all of that. Certainly we can do that in tandem. I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure it cannot be done by the September date by which we have to have the 21-22 budget finalized for the, and there will be two community hearings that you all will convene to discuss that budget in September.
Just again, as proud as I am of Old Child Leon, and I am, it was not a needs assessment. It was definitely not a needs assessment. It was that what was passed out to all of us last week is the state of the child in Leon County. That is not a needs assessment. That is not a detailed study of what's going on in particular zip codes, particular school district zones. It is a really good overview of sort of a picture of what's happening in Leon County, but there's no digging, terribly deep into it. And it's a really good document. I mean, I'm proud of it. So Dr. Glenn, I think you make a great point, and that is not just a needs assessment, but a full inventory of the services that are currently being provided. And to Commissioner Cummings' point, the law is very clear that we are not allowed to supplement services that are already being provided. We're supposed to look for the gaps. We cannot find funding elsewhere and use those dollars. So I think we're kind of all saying the same thing. It's really just a matter of do we want to front load the funding as Mr. Hanna is suggesting. And I'll take, just for sake of argument, I'll say I'll be on the other extreme, that I want to limit what I'm asking my neighbors to give, especially in what I think is a very difficult year for most Leon County residents. And so my hunch is that the other 8 of you, based on hearing what you had to say, all somewhere in between. Or pardon me, the other 7 of you, because I know Judge Shorstrom has no opinion, or at least he's not allowed to. So the other 7 of you. And now it's really just a matter of the budget committee coming up with what is a needs assessment going to cost? I know what Orange County paid. It was about $150,000. That's a safe bet. It's going to be somewhere right around 150,000. You add the good deal that we're getting on Mr. Granger, you're at to 200,000. Mr. Granger is going to need support staff. There's no doubt about that. We're starting to spend some money. And then I would say to you, a needs assessment comes out. We can all evaluate the needs assessment, and then we are going to need to ask the public and those who provide services, come forward and tell us, what do you have in your menu of items that you can offer to us to meet these needs? And by the way, as the clock is ticking and we're meeting once a month, I think we're going to find ourselves back at June pretty quickly and talking about the next budget, which my guess is we're going to ask the residents of Leon County to do as Mr. Hanna is suggesting, and that is give us the full millage, but we have justification for it. The only caveat I'll add to the comments I'm making is that I said I'm on the other extreme from Mr. Hanna, and I'm not really. I do believe that there should be funding provided for programs, because I think, 1, emergencies happen, and 2, as Mr. Sox has pointed out, we should build in for that extra month. And as the needs assessment comes out and we have a full inventory of services, there may be one glaring need that needs to be fulfilled that we as a body say, let's do it. This is a must do. So.
I would point out that really, if you read the statute and the ordinance takes the statute language almost verbatim. It's not a needs assessment. We have to do a needs assessment. It's a service plan. It says, describe how you're going to provide this and how you're going to do this, which is another component to it. In addition, one of my hopes is that, and the organization I'm talking about will target zip codes because of the need in targeted areas. What my hope is also that as the council looks at this is that we don't look necessarily at this service and this service and this service, but we figure out how, for the first time in Tallahassee, we create some type of system that accommodates the whole needs of the child that we're serving, or the needs in the areas that are your priorities. So we will maybe start a process or create a process where we're dealing with children like this as opposed to like this.
And I agree, the program, we're going to have to do a lot of evaluating of programs, whether it's starting with people going to visit mothers when they first go home with a child, or whether it's dealing with kids that are in the juvenile justice system. I'm talking about front loading what the voters have given us permission to do, to front load an account that then we can come back the next year and then spend those dollars instead of trying to spend it right as we raise it. We got to spend it. We got to spend it. We don't have to do that. We can raise the money the first year, spend it. And if we see a year or 2 years from now, hey, you know what? We don't need $9.8 million. Then we can reduce it to 0.3 or 0.2. I think we need to front load what the voters wanted.
So, yes, Madam Co-Chair. So basically right now, the point is we really need to make a decision about the millage rate so that we can have a budget. Is that basically what you're saying, Mr. Granger?
Or the opposite. We need to figure out what amount of money we want to put into the budget, and from that we can determine the millage rate.
So we don't have to determine the millage rate today?
No.
Well, for programmatic purposes, yes, because we'll need to do that. For the organizational budget, that will be funded by millage too. So when we come back in a week and a half, we'll have the operational budget for you, which will be funded. And then if we add on the contingency fund, then that would be the budget if you decide not to put any money into programs. If you decided to put on-ramp kind of issues, as Mr. O'Brien was talking about, then there would be money in the program area that could be used if it is determined by y'all that the processes and the people and all of the other things are in place to make sure that the money is being spent appropriately.
Would you please pull back up your slide number 14? Is that possible?
Slide number 14?
Yeah.
I'll ask my computer professional.
And just to make sure I'm clear that I'm advocating for the right thing, will you please clearly describe option number 2 for me again?
Okay, so let me go back, since option number 2 includes option number 1.
Okay.
Building that foundation, getting all those processes in place, doing the needs assessment, the inventory, the service plan, having the data system in place, the reporting system in place, the grant processes in place, et cetera, having all of that in place, or using it to build this. And then the 5% contingency.
Correct.
With a little bit, because what I thought I had heard at one of the other meetings was that there was an appetite to put a little bit of money into programs the first year. And I may have misheard that. The second option is basically option number 1, 2, building out in the first year, but building a higher reserves amount that could be expended if you determine it's appropriate next year or in the future.
So this would
Or in June.
As a clarification, next year would be October 1 through 21 through September 30, 22.
Correct.
So we're talking about next year really being in the next few months.
correct.
Correct.
And to, just to make sure, so this will allow us to do not a full millage rate or the full 0.5, but a portion of that so that there are funds for contingency and any immediate needs that we see that may arise from the needs assessment that we plan on doing.
Correct. So what I've heard so far is we gotta have our operational budget, that we should have a contingency fund above the best practice 5%. That would ensure we've got that October gap filled. And then you could, and I'll have to talk with folks about this. If you've got with some legal folks about this, if you have an amount in excess of the October gap, can you put that into reserves, planning on putting it into potential programs, or would it be better to budget for the programs themselves? And I'm not sure, Michelle, if you have thoughts on that?
It just all goes into a fund balance and then you have to
Yeah. So,
Dr. Glenn, really, in addition to the things we've talked about, in November, based on the contract that we have with Mr. Granger, it is contemplated that we will have a new executive director. That executive director, their salary and benefits will be part of the budget as well. So that will all be built into the administrative nut, if you will. And really, as I see it, the difference between option 1 and option 2 is how much are we going to spend on programs? And 1 and 2 are very similar. They really are. It's just a matter of, there's a slide that Mr. Granger, you had, that showed the millage rate at 0.01, all the way to 0.5. And that, I think, I mean, I don't know, where kind of everybody is, but if you think about, let's just say 0.2, okay? That's almost $4 million. And you start adding up those numbers that I threw out of, $50,000, and his support service person, who I'm guessing we would, bring on as an actual employee, which means salary and benefits. Ultimately, an executive director. Before you, and then you throw in a true needs assessment that sounds like everybody on this body wants. Before you know it, when you start adding these dimes up, you're at $1 million. We haven't funded one program, so
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we go through, we basically take option 2 with the proposed millage rate at 0.25. Just break it down the middle. That gives us room to build the plan, have some programmatic dollars so we can start bringing things on as we assess, but we don't have to bring everything on at once. Allow us to move into the next year. That'll give us enough breathing room and maybe build a little contingency. That should be enough to build contingencies for the 5% and plus the 8.5%. That's enough to build our infrastructure. That's enough to do the needs assessment, start identifying programs that we want to slide into, and maybe have a little bit extra for anything else coming through. So I'm going to go ahead and throw out there option 2 at a 0.25 mill rate.
I do have a question. I'm sorry, I do have a
Okay,
question about that.
are we trying to get to that point today? Is that what we're trying to get
We
to?
are.
No,
That's-
no, I don't.
Okay, then if that's not what we're trying to get to, I will rescind the motion.
I think we had this discussion at the previous meeting. We don't start with the mill, we start with the budget. And it's essential that we start with the budget. Now, you can have this chart up to give you some ideas, but the amount of millage has to fund your budget. Your budget shouldn't be.
We're talking
defined
about
by
chicken
what
and the egg,
The millage gets to.
Because
So-
we don't know what the programs are going to be yet.
Right, but we shouldn't start with a discussion of a millage amount. We should have a budget to look at and see what millage would fund
Okay,
it.
I will
That's the-
propose
that's
an
the-
option 2 at the budget of $4.9 million.
And the reason I spoke of a concern is that clearly the agenda did not speak to us talking about the amount of the budget today. It only spoke to having some webinars. And I'm very concerned the public did not know that we were going to have a discussion about program funding, amounts, budgeted amounts. There's no awareness of that in the public environment. If we were going to do that, I think it ought to be agended appropriately, and we ought to have public comment on it so the board can understand what the public reaction to that is before we decide on what the budget should be.
Is there any reason why we cannot put this on the agenda for next meeting? Or the meeting?
I think that would be very appropriate is to.
Right, agenda item
'Cause I think
recommendation.
it's just unfair that people didn't know that this
I agree.
discussion was going to happen. I didn't even know a presentation was going to be part of this meeting.
So you're taking back.
I'm rescinding the motion and recommending that we put on the budget, on the agenda for the meeting on, when's our next meeting?
The 15th.
The
I
15th,
second.
that we put a budget, proposed budget for this next fiscal year on the agenda.
And as I remember at our last board meeting, we had talked about having Michelle come back to talk about the various millage rates that were done at different places. And that might be really helpful to have that before this conversation too.
So are you proposing that we do that right now?
No, we talked about it not for this meeting, but for the next meeting.
Okay.
I don't want to catch her off guard. I'd rather do it at the next meeting.
So in the spirit of the old adage is politics is the art of compromise, I think that one, I like the idea of bringing this plane in for a landing. Like we need to make a decision. There's no way we can all make a decision on a program that hasn't even been proposed. But to Mr. O'Brien's point, we sort of need seed money, and that seed money may never be used in the fiscal year October 21 to September 30th of 2022. It may not, but to Mr. Hannah's point, that whatever that seed money is can then be rolled over. I will make this bet. Once we get up and running, and we have an effective way of evaluating programs, and we've got a needs assessment, we will, as a body, ask for the full millage rate. I appreciate your high hopes, Mr. Hannah, but I do not believe that 10 million will be enough to serve this community. I think there was a reason that.
No, I never said it was enough. What I'm proposing is we front end with the 10 million.
Yeah, I know. But it said that it might be adjusted downward. I like the idea of going in a little easier to begin with. And I also like the idea of giving the 9 of you the opportunity to find out, like putting together a base budget that has nothing to do with programs yet, but just to do with the administrative cost of running this operation, so that oh gosh, that's going to be 1.1 million, and we want 2 million, 3 million as a potential pot to fund programs. So we need to come up with a millage rate that meets that 4.1 million. And that's essentially what Mr. Sox was saying is we don't throw out a millage rate, we find a budget and you back into the millage rate.
So can we talk about building the operating budget before the 15th? Right? And then on the 15th, we see what that operating budget number may look like for the coming year.
That was my proposal.
And then
I think that's what we're talking
and then
about.
see the webinars and then come back on the 15th and have further discussion about
I think the idea is on the
Right.
15th,
So
we'll
we're-
actually vote on the budget.
And then notice it so that, I think to his point, make sure it's noticed.
Okay, so we're tabling this discussion now and we're coming back on the 15th with the budget discussion.
Yep.
Proposed budget.
Okay,
And the-
all in
and the bu-
favor?
And the budget committee will meet before the next meeting
Yes.
to pull that budget together.
And the budget committee will meet prior to this meeting.
Does that give
I have a
time, does that
procedural
give time
question.
for notice?
And notice that at the next meeting, I think we will decide on the millage rate. Is that what I hear? Yeah. So that the public will know.
All right.
And I guess when you're thinking about the budget, a lot of these children's services commissions leverage a lot of federal funds that come down. And I assume right now with the amount of money that's coming from the federal government, it's having a huge impact on their budget. So I don't know if that's something Michelle could speak to, but I would like to know, what are other folks leveraging right now that they hadn't in the past? What is that percent? And how might we look at building that into our budget as well?
I think that's a big unknown. I
Okay.
think we can look into it, but I think that's what federal dollars floating down. That's a big unknown.
It's huge and we got to take advantage of it.
But we
while
don't know,
can.
we should maximize that, but that's outside of
But we need to know what
our
it is.
discussion between now and next, the 15th. We're not going to know what.
Right, no, but I'm just saying, getting a briefing on it so we know moving forward what percent of our budget we might consider in the future be of federal dollars.
Okay, so for now, we are tabling this discussion with the committee meeting within the next 10 days to form the budget to bring back to us. At that time, we'll discuss the budget and then come up with the millage. All right?
So,
I'll-
okay, before, and I noticed that Ms. Osteen is not here, but I just want to make sure, because county may have different rules than the state does when it comes to public meetings, when it comes to adopting budgets. I assume that the 13 days between now and the 15th is enough time to notice that we are going to take a vote on it. The same thing needs to be probably true of the budget committee. Again, it has to be publicly noticed. I don't know how long that period of time is, but I know that I actually think it's in that it's a county ordinance more than our bylaws. And so I don't, maybe there's, I'm looking around, I don't know anybody in this room, so well, that's not true, I know a couple,
I
but
think the budget has to be advertised. Is that what you're saying, for like 2 weeks or?
yeah, I think the state, it is 2 weeks, but the county, I got the feeling when Chastity Osteen was here the first meeting, the county's a little bit different. It seemed shorter. I'm more worried about the budget committee, the four of us getting together and talking about this with the assistance of Mr. Granger without it being publicly noticed. Again, I don't know. I don't know. I know that I'm wise to ask the question, but I don't know the answer.
Commissioner Cummings, do you know the number of days?
I don't know the answer to that.
There was a gentleman
when
that
we
got
have
up
budget
in the back of the
workshops.
room and he looked like he was going to find somebody who has the answer.
Oh, he left.
I don't know.
He might come back. But when
Okay.
we have budget workshops, they are noticed
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah,
And I
Ted-
just,
Ted can find out for us.
I don't want somebody who is not supportive of what we do coming back and challenging it and winning the challenge.
And Ted can find out for us the length of time, if there is a requirement to post a budget, but 7-day meeting notice is what we're commonly used to for meetings. So if we can schedule the budget committee meeting 7 days from as soon as the calendars can be organized, we can still beat the 15th. If we can't do the budget committee before the 15th, then we'll have to do the budget discussion. on
We
the
still have another
22nd.
meeting on the 22nd.
Yep.
So I mean, we could push it off another week.
So it all depends on when the budget committee can meet. That's the big hurdle.
I'll try to get information tomorrow morning, if not tonight.
I have
All righty.
3 elected officials on that. So you guys are the ones.
7 days. The people in the audience think 7 days. People.
The attorney's in the room.
7 days.
Thank you, Mr. Linsky, first-year law student intern.
Yeah, but I don't think it's our
All right.
bylaws that dictate this. I think this is the county ordinance that dictates the public meeting notice, not our bylaws. We don't get to just pick. What's that?
We are.
Yeah, we're
Yes,
independent of the county.
we still have to, whether we like it or not, sort of follow the laws of the state of Florida and the ordinances that the county. Again, look.
So does our budget have to
Only-
have a public hearing?
I think we're subject,
Yes.
not county, but.
Huh?
subject requirement.
I think that's
Yeah,
a
I
question.
think it is.
Does our budget need a public hearing?
Trim doesn't require a public hearing. I'm not sure about county.
I think
don't
it's state requirements. I don't think it's county requirements.
I believe we are, I think once we are constituted, we are subject to the statute.
The state.
The statute requires us to have bylaws, which we have. I don't, it's painful to be independent, but I think we are independent. I don't think the ordinance is what controls that part of the budget. It's the statute.
Okay.
I think we're required to abide by the state statute.
I do have a proposal, and I know we're out of time, and that's what concerns me, because we're up against the clock with getting this stuff done. I'm not talking about this time, but getting this stuff done. Is it possible for the budget committee to meet on the 15th? That's ample time for notification,
Just
getting
early.
just the budget committee, and then we vote as a committee, as a full council on the findings and the final millage rate. That still gives us time to meet the July 1st deadline.
Yeah, so Commissioner Cummings, Judge, Mr. Hannah, you get, the 15th is,
Blocked on your calendar.
2 weeks.
yeah, the 2 o'clock is, so maybe we do it, we dedicate an hour of time, and Mr. Granger and I can have an agenda that's really very tight for you guys to consider, and you pick an hour in the morning. We can notice that meeting today. If it's good enough for the whole board to vote on a budget, it's certainly good enough for the budget committee. Is that?
Yeah, so I have graduation ceremonies starting tonight. No, but no, starting tonight through next Saturday. So, but I'm good on the 15th. If we could, I would just ask if we could do it maybe mid-morning instead of later in the afternoon.
Sure, the
meeting.
this meeting is the afternoon. It's at 2 o'clock.
So we're talking about having the budget meeting in the morning and then this meeting in the afternoon to discuss everything.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So
Okay, so maybe 10 o'clock?
I was
Commissioner
proposing we
Cummings?
vote on the 22nd. Is that an,
No, we're talking about doing it all the same day.
So, Judge, does 10 a.m. on the 15th work for you?
I don't know, but I'll make it work.
Okay, so we are publicly noticing, Mr. Granger, if you could assist us with this, that we are going to have a budget committee to discuss the upcoming budget on the morning of the 15th at 10 a.m. And I don't know if this location is right. We can find a meeting room in this county building, I'm guessing.
Commissioner Cummings' office.
Yeah.
It'll be Commissioner Cummings' office. That's in this building, isn't it?
We won't be socially
Just
distanced.
clean up on the 14th. A little dusty.
All right, so we are back on the agenda, so now I think we're
Yes, sir.
off the mill.
We're off. We're off.
I'm gonna go ahead and take back over.
Yes, sir.
Vice Chairman, with your permission.
Absolutely.
Brings us to number 11, which is the schedule of future meetings. That is item 31 in your packet. I now realize that I messed up at the very beginning. The June 23rd on there is the webinar date, not the meeting. The meeting date is on page 31 of the package. Just June 15 and then June 22nd. Now we have a budget committee meeting set for 10 a.m. also on. That brings us, so that's the schedule of future meetings. Any discussion of the schedule of future meetings?
Judge, I'm going to be a short visitor on the 22nd. I have a Escambia Children's Trust meeting that evening in Pensacola, and I've got a 3-hour drive to get there. So I'll probably be here from 2 to 3. I think I can make it there by 5:30, which is our 6:30. I might be able to hang for an hour and a half, but about an hour and I'll have to leave. So if there's any big issues on the 22nd that need my input, please schedule them early in the agenda.
Very good. I continue to hope that we'll get.
so Judge? I won't be here on the 15th, much to my dismay, and I'm stressed because I really wanted to be a part of that discussion. And that's why I was advocating for the budget committee to meet on the 15th. But I just wanted to let you know that's the situation, and I just have to be dismissed from that meeting.
here's what I'm going to propose that we think about based on what Dr. Glenn just told us, which is that if we have a significant amount of dispute or it's a close vote at all, we can postpone, end up postponing.
And we could still get the public input on the 15th
Still have the public.
and still have the final vote on the 22nd, early in the meeting.
So good. So we got to schedule future meetings. The agenda for the next meeting is our normal call to order, roll call, approval agenda, approval of meetings, public comment. We've got an interim administrator. We still need an update on the interlocal agreement.
So on the morning of the 15th, the budget committee is going to meet. On the afternoon of the 15th, the budget committee will.
No, we're going to put something out there and receive public comment.
And so
on
the
15th.
afternoon of the 15th, this group will meet, okay, without Dr. Glenn for discussion. And if we have to then advertise a proposed budget for until the 22nd or whatever, I don't know, again, what the rules are. We need to figure out what the rules are for our budget. So you may have to advertise a budget, proposed budget on the 15th to be voted on the 22nd. Or maybe not. What you're saying is that we would then have a budget discussion on the 15th and then vote on the budget on the 22nd.
Right.
Correct.
Get all the public input on the 15th.
So, but that's not quite what I'm proposing. What I'm hoping is that we're done with the budget on the 15th. That we have consensus and that Dr. Glenn's absence, we all have confidence that she can tolerate the decision we just made and that we're done and that the rules let us be done.
Okay, let's do it.
We have the 22nd if we need.
So on the 15th, Your Honor, we've got 10 o'clock in the morning for the budget committee and then 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, for the board meeting.
One of the webinars is scheduled for the 15th
Of course.
in the morning. So now you're down to the 9th if you wanted to watch the trim webinar.
So everybody on the budget
Well,
committee, you
only-
better schedule it on the 9th.
Right.
There will be important things in that webinar other than for this one meeting, so.
You're the 9th.
Yes.
Scheduled on top.
I'm sorry.
I said, I blame you.
Oh, well, you should blame me. Yes. I did it on purpose, so I'd have an excused absence from the trim meeting. I've sat through one of those.
All right, so update on the interlocal agreement, we've elected treasurer, we've established our committees. Really, the only other thing that I want to put on the budget, on the agenda. So our substantive discussion will be update on interlocal agreement, county's actions, meeting on June 8th, and vote on the budget. That's our agenda. And of course, we have our schedule now.
Judge, I asked Mr. Granger if he would reach out to the county attorney to do the presentation on ethics, sunshine, and financial reporting. If there's room on the agenda for the 15th, that would be great because that precedes the 1st, which is when all the financial reporting is due.
Ethics, sunshine, financial reporting, is that what
Yes. If the county attorney is available, that would be great for the 15th.
Also, I assume we want Mr. Granger to provide an administrative update on activities related to the development of all support programs, accounting firms, law firms, whatever he's doing. Any engagement or conversation around search firm, search support, and then also on the community assessment, of the needs assessment. So just an administrative update.
So update on engagement of providers for administrative.
Just, yeah, I just say administrative update.
Yeah.
There's a whole list of things, and I'll let him fill in the gaps.
Any other discussion of the agenda for the next meeting?
I think did you have Michelle speaking on the millage rates?
I meant to, but I didn't. Watson's not available on the.
Perhaps Ms. Watson could just put it in memo format and share it with Judge Shorstrom, who then could put it on our website and disseminate it to all of us. Is that? Okay. You look at me.
Ted can present it.
Old dog, new track.
We got Ted now.
We got Ted. Yeah, we got power. Send that over to Ted.
Ted's got skill.
Anything else? Any other discussion of the agenda? All right, see no other discussion, so that'll be the agenda for our next meeting. Member comment? Any member comment?
Judge, I have an opportunity that I want to make folks aware of. The Florida statutes that organize the Department of Children and Families provide for the existence of community alliances. And we have a Circuit 2 Community Alliance here in the 6 counties on this side of the river. On the membership of the Community Alliance, it states that the membership shall consist of a representative from the County Children's Board, if one exists. So we are actively seeking one of the members of the Children's Board to participate on the County Alliance, the Circuit Alliance. So I just want to make you aware of that. I can give you the statutory reference if you need it. We meet quarterly for Circuit 2, and anybody who wants to be that member, come see me. Love to have you on our alliance.
Any other member comment? Privilege to serve with you. It's a privilege to serve the people who are so passionate. That being said, 15 minutes early, we are adjourned. The other crazy part,
I have it on red. No, that's right. They're very permanent pictures like that.
Oh my God.
Doing great. She's a musician. She's on YouTube. We're going out. She was here. Shows. So she does that. Usually yearly.
Anyway, wonderful seeing you.
Thanks. Yeah. I wouldn't hear anybody chiming in, but I think.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work. I have never been prouder sitting next to somebody. I got to tell you, it's the greatest. It's the greatest.
Yes.
I was like, 8 or whatever, you're responding to me. I thought, what a public servant you are. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it. I'm learning a lot, so I'm happy to do it. Take care.
Let me write my email address. Oh, I'd love you to do that. I think I've got it, but yeah, I will. Well, I'll send you, I'm gonna send you some bullet points. I guess I just send everybody. Everybody's settling into this responsibility. It's because you're a Democrat, not despite that. I'm a speech writer, ultimately. Congratulations.
Well, I guess I should say congratulations on me. Oh, and that's not for bad reasons. No. It's just different, right? You love them. Anyway. Hopefully. Oh, thank you. So anyway. Give him a call.
like,
All right, sorry about that. See you
Yeah.
guys.
So
Thank you
those
much
are
for
all the
coming.
things that I'll work, we can get organized. And we have RFPs for needs assessments. We have all the CEO job descriptions, like you all don't.
Well, I mean, I will tell you, I feel like the weight of the world is.
No,
on
I'm
my
sure you-
shoulders,
yeah.
Because this is.
Yes.
I do not All right, see you guys. That's what we do. Listen, the statute's clear on what to do. The rest of this, make it up as you go along here. I didn't use your word today, but. So, we'll figure that. Oh, it was great. It was great. That was so many good times. And yet- Well, you know, I sang that was fun. Yeah. Yeah.